She let him out at 7:13 in the morning. His name was Ranger, 14 months of specialized training for a Marine who lost his eyes in Fallujah. Linda said his barking disturbed her morning yoga, so she unlatched the kennel gate and walked away. Ranger made it less than a mile before the highway. The blind veteran he was paired with still doesn't know his guide dog isn't coming home. His name is Sergeant Marcus Cole. He lost his vision to an IED outside Fallujah in 2004. After years of darkness and isolation, he was finally matched with Ranger, a yellow lab trained to be his eyes. They'd been partnered for just 3 weeks when Linda Marshall, the president of his neighborhood HOA, decided the dog's barking was a nuisance. She opened the gate. Ranger died on the asphalt. What followed was a legal war that would cost one woman her home, her freedom, and everything she owned. Marcus Cole grew up in a town of 1,200 people in southeastern Ohio, where his grandfather taught him to shoot and his grandmother taught him to pray. He enlisted in the Marine Corps at 19, 3 weeks after the towers fell. By 22, he was a sergeant leading a fire team through the streets of Fallujah, clearing houses, kicking doors, and watching his friends die in alleys that smelled like diesel and burned rubber. Then came the IED. A pressure plate buried in a trash pile on November 7, 2004. The blast killed 2 men in his vehicle and sent shrapnel through both of Marcus's eyes. He woke up 2 weeks later at Walter Reed with his mother holding his hand and the world already gone. For 17 years, Marcus rebuilt his life in darkness. He learned Braille. He learned to navigate with a cane. He moved to a quiet suburb outside Colorado Springs, a single-story house with a fenced yard. He kept himself alive with routines, audiobooks, and the stubborn Marine refusal to let blindness become defeat. But he was lonely, dependent on others for simple errands, and increasingly isolated. Then, in 2022, he applied for a guide dog through a nonprofit that paired disabled veterans with trained service animals. The wait list was 2 years. Marcus marked each day on a talking calendar. Ranger arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. A yellow lab with intelligent brown eyes, trained for 14 months at a cost of $63,000, all funded by donors. He knew over 40 commands. He could stop at curbs, find empty chairs, locate exits, and ignore distractions. But more than that, he was warm and alive and present. For the first time in years, Marcus felt less like a casualty and more like a man. 3 weeks of bonding. 3 weeks of walking to the grocery store with his hand on a harness and his heart beating with something close to hope. Linda Marshall lived 3 houses down. She was 57, a retired real estate agent with a sun-chapped tan, a white Lexus, and a stranglehold on the HOA board. She'd been president for 6 consecutive terms, running unopposed each year because she made it clear that any challenger would face relentless scrutiny of their property violations. Her neighborhood ran on fear and beige paint compliance. She practiced yoga every morning at exactly 7 in her glass-walled sunroom, facing the alley that separated her yard from Marcus Cole's fence. The morning of April 23rd, Ranger was in the outdoor kennel that Marcus had built with help from his brother. It was a sturdy enclosure, 6 feet high chain link, with a latched gate. Marcus was inside the house making coffee when Ranger started barking. Not aggressive barking. The alert barking of a dog who heard something unfamiliar, maybe a delivery truck, maybe a neighbor's cat. Linda heard it through her sunroom window. She paused her downward dog, exhaled sharply, and walked across her yard in bare feet. The latch on the gate was a simple slide bolt. She slid it open. Then she turned around and went back to her yoga, leaving the gate swinging wide. Ranger, a dog trained to explore, to lead, to navigate the world for his blind handler, did exactly what dogs do. He walked out. He followed a scent down the alley, then north along the sidewalk, then across a field toward the sound of cars moving fast on Highway 24. A driver named Teresa Gilmore saw a flash of yellow fur, slammed her brakes, and couldn't stop in time. Ranger died instantly at 7:42 in the morning. Marcus found the empty kennel at 7:50 when he came out with Ranger's breakfast bowl. He called the dog's name. He patted the ground. He felt along the fence line. Nothing. A neighbor walking her own dog saw him on his knees and broke the news. Marcus did not cry. He stood up, walked inside, and called the police. Then he called the organization that had trained Ranger. Then he called a lawyer. Because here's what Linda Marshall didn't understand. A service dog is not a pet. Under federal law, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, under Colorado Criminal Statute 18-9-202, intentionally releasing a service animal is a felony offense. And that was just the beginning. Linda Marshall had just declared war on a Marine, and Marines know how to finish one. The responding officer was Sergeant Alicia Reyes. She arrived at 8:03 in the morning and found Marcus sitting on his front steps with the empty leash coiled in his lap. He didn't look up when her cruiser pulled into the driveway. He just pointed toward the kennel gate, still swinging slightly in the breeze. "She opened it," he said. "The woman from the sunroom." Reyes walked the scene, photographed the latch, and interviewed a jogger who had seen a woman in white yoga pants walking away from the kennel at 7:20. Then she knocked on Linda Marshall's door. Linda answered with her yoga mat rolled under one arm and a glass of cucumber water in her hand. She looked at the sergeant and smiled. "Is there a problem?" Reyes asked if she had touched the neighbor's gate. Linda didn't flinch. "Absolutely not. That dog was dangerous. It barked all morning. It probably broke out on its own." But Linda didn't know about the Martins across the alley. They had installed a Ring doorbell camera 2 weeks earlier after a package theft. The camera pointed directly at Marcus Cole's kennel. Reyes reviewed the footage an hour later. It showed Linda Marshall, deliberate and unhurried, sliding the bolt, pulling the gate open wide, then turning and walking away without a backward glance. She was arrested at 3:15 that afternoon in her own driveway, charged with aggravated cruelty to a service animal, a Class 6 felony in Colorado. She posted bond in 40 minutes and was home before dinner, drafting her first Facebook post. That post went live at 7:42 p.m., the exact minute Ranger had died that morning. Linda had 3,000 Facebook friends and a lifetime of practice playing the victim. "Neighbor's vicious dog terrorized our street for weeks," she wrote. "I was arrested for simply walking past a fence. This is what happens when disabled veterans get special treatment." The comments flooded in fast. People she'd never met called Marcus a danger to the community. Someone posted his address. Someone else suggested he shouldn't be living alone. By midnight, the post had 600 shares. Marcus didn't see it. He couldn't. But he heard the notification chimes from his talking phone, the robotic voice reading comments aloud to him in his dark living room. That's how a blind Marine learned that his neighborhood wanted him gone. 2 days later, the organization that had trained Ranger issued a statement. K9s for Veterans had placed over 3,000 service dogs with disabled vets across the country. Their director, a retired Army colonel named Sarah Keating, told a local news crew that Ranger had been purchased from a specialist breeder for $8,000, trained for 14 months at a cost of $55,000 more, and that the total value of the dog, counting the years of lost service he would have provided, exceeded $240,000. "But that's not what matters," she said, looking directly into the camera. "This was a targeted act against a disabled veteran, and we are not going to let this go." What nobody knew yet was that the organization had already contacted their pro bono legal partners, a Denver firm that specialized in ADA litigation, and they had a name. His name was Elliot Vance, a former Marine Corps judge advocate who had left the service and built a reputation for one thing: dismantling people who mistreated veterans. When he read the police report and watched the doorbell footage, he didn't see a neighbor dispute. He saw a hate crime. The ADA didn't just protect service animals from interference. It classified them as medical equipment, as essential to a disabled person's life as a wheelchair or a pacemaker. Intentionally releasing one was legally indistinguishable from walking into a hospital room and unplugging someone's ventilator. Vance called Marcus that afternoon. "I'm going to take everything she owns," he said. "Her money, her reputation, her freedom, and that house she loves so much. You just say the word." Marcus said the word. And then the real fight began. Linda Marshall had been HOA president for 6 years, and she'd spent those years building a kingdom of fear. She had fined neighbors for leaving trash bins out an hour too long, for painting their doors the wrong shade of gray, for planting flowers without committee approval. But her cruelty wasn't just petty. Elliot Vance's discovery process uncovered a pattern that made the dog incident look like a symptom of something much darker. He found HOA complaints filed against 3 other disabled residents in the past 5 years. One was a woman with multiple sclerosis who used a wheelchair and had been fined 8 times for having a ramp that allegedly violated community aesthetics. She eventually moved out. Another was a veteran with PTSD whose emotional support dog, a gentle golden retriever, had been labeled a nuisance after 2 noise complaints. That dog was given away to a family in another state. The HOA had never held a hearing. They had simply issued violation letters with escalating fines until the owners broke. Vance subpoenaed the HOA's financial records next. What he found made his jaw drop. Linda had been siphoning money from the association's reserve fund for years. Personal charges disguised as landscape maintenance and legal consulting. A $10,000 transfer to her son's college tuition account. A $4,000 payment to a plastic surgeon in Denver. The HOA board was stacked with her friends and relatives who rubber-stamped every expense. Linda wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was running the HOA like a personal piggy bank, and every single transaction was documented in the association's QuickBooks file, which she had never bothered to password protect. On May 15th, Vance filed an amended civil complaint that combined the service animal claim with fraud, embezzlement, and civil rights violations. He sought damages of $1.3 million. He also sent a copy to the Colorado Attorney General's office, the county district attorney, and crucially, the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of General Counsel. The VA had a little-known mandate to protect the rights of veterans under federal law. When they saw the evidence, they didn't hesitate. Within a week, the VA filed a federal civil rights action in U.S. District Court, joining the case on Marcus's behalf. The press release used words like systemic discrimination and willful deprivation of federally protected rights. Linda Marshall woke up one Monday morning to find a federal summons taped to her front door and a news van from the Denver ABC affiliate parked on her lawn. But Linda still had 3 tools left: lies, money, and fear. She hired a defense attorney named Russell Kemp, a man whose website bragged about getting charges dropped for clients who could afford his retainer. Kemp went on the offensive. He filed a motion to dismiss the federal case, arguing that Linda's actions were a simple trespass, not a civil rights violation. He filed a counterclaim against Marcus for emotional distress, claiming that his dog's barking had caused Linda anxiety and loss of enjoyment of her property. He also filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services, suggesting that Marcus was too disabled to care for himself and that his continued presence in the neighborhood constituted a danger to others. This was the low point. Marcus sat in his living room while a social worker from the county asked him whether he could bathe himself, whether he knew how to use a stove, whether he had ever considered assisted living. He answered each question quietly and completely. Then he asked the social worker, "Do you have any other questions, or can I get back to fighting the woman who killed my dog?" The social worker closed her file and left. 2 days later, the county cleared him of all allegations and noted in the case file that the complaint appeared to be retaliatory. But the damage was done. Marcus had spent 2 hours defending his basic competence to a stranger because Linda Marshall wanted to bury him in bureaucratic quicksand. And then the tide turned. A former HOA board member named Patricia Okonkwo stepped forward. She had resigned 3 years earlier after Linda had bullied her into approving a landscaping contract with her husband's company. Patricia had kept records. She had emails, meeting minutes, and a thumb drive containing the original unaltered financial records of the HOA. She met Elliot Vance in a coffee shop in downtown Colorado Springs and slid the thumb drive across the table. "She's been stealing for years," Patricia said. "I was too scared to say anything. I'm not scared anymore." Those documents showed not just embezzlement, but a coordinated scheme to force disabled residents out of the neighborhood so Linda and her allies could buy their properties at depressed prices. They had done it 3 times already. Ranger's death wasn't an impulse. It was part of a business model. Vance walked those documents into federal court and asked for an emergency prejudgment attachment on Linda's assets. He argued, with the evidence to back it up, that Linda was a flight risk, that she had already begun transferring funds to an account in her son's name, and that her house was the only substantial asset that could satisfy the coming judgment. Judge Marion Holloway reviewed the records for 14 minutes. Then she signed the order. A federal marshal drove to Linda's cul-de-sac and nailed the notice to her front door. The house, appraised at $780,000, was now frozen. She couldn't sell it, borrow against it, or transfer it. That white stucco house with the three-car garage and the sunroom where she had practiced yoga every morning was now collateral for justice. Linda came home that evening, saw the paper fluttering against the door frame, read it, and began screaming loud enough for the entire street to hear. That was the moment everything changed. But the final act of this war hadn't even started yet. Linda Marshall spent the next 48 hours trying to unfreeze her life. She called every lawyer in Colorado Springs. She emailed her son, the one with the tuition payment, asking him to return the money. He didn't answer. She drove to the bank and tried to withdraw $40,000 in cash from a joint account. The teller informed her that a federal hold had been placed on all accounts linked to her Social Security number. She left without making a scene, but her hands were trembling so badly she couldn't start the ignition for 5 full minutes. Back home, she pulled her 3,000 Facebook friends into a private group and titled it Justice for Linda. She wrote a post explaining that her HOA was being destroyed by a disabled veteran who couldn't control his violent dog. She claimed the government was persecuting her for standing up to special interests. The post got 900 reactions in the first hour. Then the other victims started speaking. Patricia Okonkwo's evidence had opened a floodgate, and Elliot Vance made a strategic decision to let it flow publicly. He arranged a press conference featuring the woman with multiple sclerosis who had been driven out of the neighborhood. Her name was Gloria Simmons. She sat in her wheelchair and told reporters how Linda had fined her for a wheelchair ramp, then denied her a reasonable accommodation hearing, then filed a lien against her home. "She told me people like me lowered property values," Gloria said, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "I sold my house at a loss just to escape." The story aired at 10 p.m. by morning. 4 more former residents had contacted Vance with their own accounts of discrimination, fraud, and intimidation. Linda's private Facebook group had leaked. Screenshots circulated showing her calling Gloria a scam artist and Marcus a welfare case. The group lost 1,000 members overnight, but the real explosion came from an unexpected source. Linda's son, Derek, a 24-year-old graduate student at Colorado State, had been watching the news. He'd grown up with a mother who controlled everything, including his bank accounts, his college choices, and his understanding of right and wrong. He'd believed her story about the dangerous dog. Then he saw the doorbell footage. He saw his mother, calm and methodical, opening the kennel gate. He saw the dog's tail wag before it wandered out. That night, Derek called Elliot Vance from a blocked number. He said he had something his mother had hidden, a safety deposit box key. The box was at a Wells Fargo in Pueblo. In it, he believed, were the original unaudited HOA financial records going back 10 years. Vance asked why he was doing this. Derek paused. "Because my mom used my college fund to pay for her facelift and told me it was a scholarship. I've been lying for her my whole life. I'm done." The safety deposit box contained what Vance later described as a conviction in a box. 10 years of ledgers showing systematic embezzlement totaling over $320,000. But that wasn't all. Linda had kept a file titled Neighborhood Cleanup. It was a list of properties she had targeted for acquisition. Each entry included the owner's name, disability status, estimated home value, and a strategy for forcing them out. Next to Gloria Simmons's name, she had written, MS, weak, ramp violation, lien, buy at auction. Next to Marcus Cole's name, she had written, blind vet, dog noisy, possible nuisance claim, house would flip easily. The document was handwritten in purple ink. The prosecution later used it to establish premeditation. Linda hadn't just released a dog. She had been hunting disabled people for profit for a decade. On June 3rd, a federal grand jury indicted Linda Marshall on 12 counts. 1 count of aggravated cruelty to a service animal under Colorado law, 3 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of bank fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, 1 count of conspiracy to deprive individuals of civil rights, and 1 count of retaliation against a federal witness for the false APS complaint. The maximum sentence was 180 years. Russell Kemp, her attorney, held a press conference and called the charges politically motivated overreach. He then resigned as her counsel the following day, citing irreconcilable differences. A public defender was appointed. Linda sat in the El Paso County Jail for 3 weeks because the judge denied bail, citing the forged passport that investigators had found in her bedroom closet. The trial began on September 11th in the federal courthouse in Denver. The prosecution was led by an assistant U.S. attorney named Diana Osei, who had a 94% conviction rate and a reputation for dismantling white-collar criminals with surgical precision. She opened by playing the doorbell footage. Then she called Sergeant Alicia Reyes, who described Linda's initial lies. Then she called Teresa Gilmore, the driver who had hit Ranger, who wept on the stand and said it had been the worst day of her life. Then she called Marcus Cole. Marcus wore his Marine dress blues. He walked to the stand with his cane, guided by a court officer. He sat, adjusted his dark glasses, and faced the jury box where he could see nothing but the afterimages of an old war. The prosecutor asked him to describe what Ranger meant to him. He spoke for 4 minutes without a single pause. He described the first time Ranger placed his head on his knee, the first walk to the grocery store without a cane. The feeling of being seen, not as a blind man, but as a man with a dog who loved him. He was my eyes, Marcus said, and she took them just because he made too much noise. The courtroom was silent. 2 jurors were crying. Linda looked at her hands. The cross-examination lasted only 3 questions. The public defender asked Marcus if he had ever met Linda before the incident. No, if he could positively identify her as the person who opened the gate. Not visually, but the police told him. The attorney tried to suggest mistaken identity. Marcus leaned toward the microphone. Your client confessed on a Ring camera. The entire neighborhood heard her scream when she got caught. She can pretend all she wants, but everyone knows the truth. The judge called the sidebar. The public defender sat down. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, guilty on all 12 counts. Sentencing was set for November 15th. At that hearing, Judge Holloway addressed Linda directly. You weaponized a homeowners association to terrorize the vulnerable. You stole from your neighbors. You destroyed a federally protected service animal. And you showed zero remorse until the moment you were caught. I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison. Then she turned to the civil judgment. The VA had filed for restitution under the Justice for Veterans Act, claiming the cost of Ranger's training plus the years of service lost, totaling $340,000. The court awarded Marcus an additional $1.2 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The only way to satisfy the judgment was through the seizure of Linda's house and all remaining assets. On December 2nd, federal marshals arrived at the white stucco house on Linda's cul-de-sac. They posted an eviction notice. A moving crew packed her belongings into boxes that were stored in a warehouse she would never see. The house was sold at auction for $730,000. The proceeds went directly to Marcus and the VA. That house, the symbol of Linda's kingdom, was now legally the property of the Department of Veterans Affairs for exactly the time it took to sign the closing papers. Then it was sold to a young family with a deaf child who needed a quiet street for her service dog. The new family moved in on a Tuesday in January. Their daughter, a 7-year-old named Amara, had been born deaf. Her service dog was a golden retriever named Echo, trained to alert her to doorbells, fire alarms, and her mother's voice. The first thing the family did was build a kennel in the backyard, the same spot where Ranger had once lived. Marcus Cole attended the housewarming. He stood in the sunroom, the very room where Linda had practiced yoga, and listened to Amara's laughter as Echo chased a ball across the grass. He didn't need to see it. He could feel it. The sound of a child and her dog, safe and free, on ground that had been reclaimed from cruelty. That was justice. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond one neighborhood. In January, the Colorado State Legislature introduced House Bill 24-091, the Service Animal Protection Act. It elevated the penalty for intentionally harming a service animal from a Class 6 felony to a Class 4, carrying mandatory prison time and a minimum fine of $50,000. It also required HOAs to undergo fair housing training and explicitly prohibited the use of architectural guidelines to discriminate against disabled residents. The bill passed unanimously in both chambers. At the signing ceremony, Governor Jard Polis handed the pen to Marcus Cole. "This law has your dog's name on it," he said. "Ranger's law." Marcus touched the paper, felt the raised ink of his own signature and nodded. Good. Now his death meant something. Patricia Okonkwo, the former board member who had turned over the evidence, was elected the new HOA president in a special election. She ran on a platform of transparency, inclusion, and zero tolerance for discrimination. Her first act was to dissolve the Architectural Review Committee that Linda had weaponized. Her second was to refund every fine that Linda had issued to disabled residents with interest. Her third was to rename the community park. It had been called Marshall Green after Linda herself. Patricia changed it to Ranger's Run, a dog park with a bronze plaque bearing the dog's photograph and the words, "He gave his eyes so a Marine could see. He gave his life so a community could heal." For the other victims, the settlement money began to flow. Gloria Simmons received a check for $480,000, the full value of her home plus damages for the years of harassment. She used part of it to build a nonprofit legal clinic in downtown Colorado Springs that provides free representation to disabled homeowners facing HOA discrimination. The clinic opened on the one-year anniversary of Ranger's death. Gloria sat in the lobby in her wheelchair, watching the lines stretch out the door. "She tried to erase me," Gloria said. "Instead, I'm going to be the reason she loses more sleep." By the end of the year, the clinic had taken on 63 cases and won 51 of them. For Marcus Cole, the path was slower. Grief doesn't observe court dates. He spent months in his house, unable to imagine another dog resting its head on his knee. The silence was the hardest part. Without Ranger's nails clicking on the hardwood, without the soft jingle of his harness, the house felt like a tomb. His daughter, a nurse in Denver, visited every weekend. His son, a college student, called every night, but they couldn't fill the absence. In March, the organization that had trained Ranger called. They had a dog named Atlas, a black lab, 2 years old, trained specifically for veterans with combat-related blindness. They wanted to know if Marcus was ready. He said no. He said no again in April. In May, he said yes. Atlas arrived on a morning much like the one when Ranger had come. The dog walked into the house, sniffed the air, and laid his head directly on Marcus's knee without any command. Marcus reached down, felt the warm fur, the steady heartbeat, and the wet nose pushing into his palm. He didn't cry, he smiled. "Okay," he said, "let's go to work." Their first walk together was to the grocery store, the same route Marcus had walked with Ranger. When they reached the parking lot, a neighbor stopped and said, "That's a beautiful dog, is he new?" Marcus turned toward the voice, his dark glasses reflecting the Colorado sun, and said, "He's my second chance." The surprising detail that nobody saw coming arrived in August. The VA's Office of General Counsel, reviewing the case for a legal precedent publication, uncovered something buried in the discovery materials. Linda Marshall's pattern of targeting disabled homeowners hadn't started in Colorado. Before she moved there in 2012, she had lived in a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona, where she had served as HOA vice president. Records from that period showed identical behavior: noise complaints filed against 3 disabled residents, fines issued for disability-related modifications, forced sales at below-market prices. 2 of those residents had since died. Their families didn't know that the harassment they'd endured was part of a pattern. The VA contacted the Arizona Attorney General's office and the Maricopa County prosecutor. Linda Marshall, already serving 22 years in federal prison, faced new charges in a second state. Her sentence was extended by 8 more years. She will be 79 years old before she is eligible for release. The case changed how America thinks about service animals and the law. Elliot Vance wrote a law review article that became required reading at 12 law schools. Diana Osei, the prosecutor, was nominated for a federal judgeship. The Ring doorbell footage that convicted Linda was incorporated into a public service announcement that aired during the Super Bowl. 43 million people saw Linda Marshall open that gate. 43 million people heard Marcus Cole's voice. He was my eyes. She took them because he made too much noise. The PSA ended with a hotline number for reporting service animal abuse. It received 22,000 calls in the first week. Marcus didn't watch the Super Bowl ad. He was at a veterans picnic with Atlas at his side, eating barbecue and listening to old Marines tell stories that got funnier every time they were told. A young corporal, home from his first deployment, asked him about the case. Marcus shrugged. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't quit." The corporal nodded slowly. "That's what special means, Sergeant." Atlas, sensing the moment, placed his head on the corporal's boot. Everyone laughed. The tension broke. That's the thing about dogs. They know when you need to stop talking and just be. That story should not be rare. It should be the rule. Every time a neighbor decides that a disabled person's accommodations are too loud, too visible, too inconvenient, the system should answer with the force it brought against Linda Marshall. But we know that doesn't always happen. For every Marcus Cole with a doorbell camera and a Marine's refusal to quit, there are 100 others who get ground down, who sell the house, who give up the dog, who disappear. The law is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it, and enforcement requires evidence, allies, and the stubborn belief that if you document everything and refuse to be silent, the truth eventually catches up. Rangers' law exists now in Colorado. Other states are considering similar bills. That bronze plaque in Rangers Run gets touched by children who have no idea that a dog's death changed the legal landscape they now live in. Marcus doesn't visit the park much. He doesn't need to. He walks Atlas past the courthouse every morning, and the guard at the metal detector waves, and the clerks who watch the trial say hello, and the dog wags his tail because he knows these people are safe. That is what winning looks like. Not just a check or a headline, but the quiet erosion of the power structures that allowed cruelty to wear a yoga outfit and call itself community standards. Here is the question you need to ask yourself. If your neighbor opened your gate tomorrow, would you have the footage, the receipts, the allies? If not, start building that file now, because the Linda Marshalls of the world are not rare. They are just rarely caught. And when they are, it's because someone decided to fight. Someone decided that their pain was evidence and their voice was a weapon. Be that someone. And if you can't be, then be the neighbor who saves the video, who writes the witness statement, who refuses to look away. If this story meant something to you, if it made you angry in a productive way, then you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the little guy can still win. And drop your own story in the comments. Have you ever faced an HOA that crossed the line? A neighbor who weaponized rules against you? A moment where you had to choose between walking away and burning it all down? Tell me. I read every single one. And next week, we do it again. New story, new villain, same lesson. Keep your receipts, all of them.